Good morning, everybody, and welcome to 2021. And we all hope it is going to be the best year since 2019. I think we just forget about last year. We have a really exciting program of authors that we are going to reveal very, very soon. And we're really, really thrilled this week to be starting with a huge bestseller that I'm sure many of you have already read. Claire Allan, who is going to be joining us shortly. Claire is a former journalist and now best-selling author from Derry in Northern Ireland. And her latest book, Ask No Questions, was published yesterday, I think, or maybe even today. But it's certainly out and you need to order it from your local bookstore. Claire graduated with a master's degree in newspaper journalism from Ulster University in 1999, and she started work as a staff reporter in the Derry Journal, and she covered a whole array of news from politics to human interest, and she was the paper's first female columnist and was also acting news editor. She had a really distinguished career as a journalist. Was part of the award-winning team that covered the Savile inquiry into the events of Bloody Sunday, and also Derry's amazing year as the first UK city of culture. Claire said in a number of interviews that the best part of the job was always meeting ordinary people with extraordinary stories to tell, which I'm sure you'll all agree is a really, really good basis for being a novelist. So in 2006, which is pretty recent, she decided to try and fulfill a lifetime ambition to write a novel. So she spent 6 months writing Rainy Days and Tuesdays, and this was published by Poolbeg in 2007 and became an instant bestseller. 7 more women's fiction novels followed, and then Claire made that really brave leap to leave journalism and become a full-time author. And so 10 years after the debut came out, she wrote Her Name Was Rose, which was published by Avon in 2008 and became a bestseller UK, Ireland, Canada, America, and Australia. And it was followed by Apple of My Eye, Forget Me Not, and The Lion's Daughter. And as I say, the new novel, Ask No Questions, was out last night. So Claire is a Derry girl, still lives in Derry, and is married and has 2 children and 2 cats. And I need to tell you the cats' names because they're Alfie and Kitty Purry. And there's a puppy called Izzy. So Claire, you are very welcome. Good morning and welcome to How to Win the Writing Game.
Thank you very much for having me along today.
Pleasure. So tell me where you are, where you're speaking from, because that's always good to know.
Well, this is where I normally write, but at the moment, given circumstances, this is also our homeschooling room and our dining room and everything else. So I apologize if anybody comes in through the door. They've been warned, but you just never know. So my daughter's been shifted to another room to do her geography lesson, and I've taken over here for the day.
So that's your 2 children are nicknamed as the teen and the wee doll. Is that right?
Exactly. The teen is almost 17. So he really is, on the verge of adulthood, thinks he's 27, and the wee doll is coming up on 12. So she's not so wee anymore. She's in teenage years, which is great crack. But yeah, so I'm lucky now that they are a bit older. When I started writing, my son was 2, and the wee doll wasn't even an idea then. So they've been along this writing journey with me the whole time.
So you left Ulster University and you got your job as a kind of junior reporter on the paper, which is how everybody starts. And I'm sure you were covering, you were sent out into the community probably on a rusty bicycle and you picked up all the news and you wrote about it. But did you find did that give you a real sort of interest in the minutiae of life? Or was that something that was there anyway?
I think it was there anyway, but actually getting out and meeting people, you realize just how wide the experiences are.
Yeah.
You can pass somebody in the street and they look like I hate the word normal, but they look like a normal person. You don't know what's going on, behind that facade. And that's one thing that I'm really interested in and I love to explore in my writing, how things appear and how things actually are. And one thing I learned over 17 years is that there's probably more people that have remarkable stories than don't. And it's incredible, the strength of human spirit. It floored me time and time and time again to hear these people's stories and to have them trust me to tell their story, which was the great part about, being a journalist. You move on to novelist and it changes a little bit.
And obviously the paper really believed in you and decided that it was about time they had a female columnist and it should be you. So it's a lovely moment, that having a column that you've got to fill every week, but it's quite sort of intimidating.
It was lovely. My editor at the time was a Donegal man called Pat McGart, and he really, really old school editor. If you saw an editor in an old movie, that was him. Swore, shouted, we, got everything done. A brilliant editor, absolutely brilliant.
Yeah.
And I had said to him one day, this is a disgrace. This paper is 200 years old and don't have a female columnist. And he went, okay, then you do it. So that's not what I had wanted at all, but I rose to the challenge, and thankfully Pat liked what I wrote, and the column ran for about 10, 11 years until I left journalism in 2016.
So it's interesting. You talked about the teen and the wee doll and the fact how small they were when you started writing. How did you manage to be a full-time journalist, a full-time mother, and also find time to write? Because I know we have a lot of writers who join us on a Friday, and I think that's the big conundrum. How do you get the balance?
You know what? I think that it's there and it's your passion, so you want to do it. That's your downtime, and for me, it was my downtime. It was the one place where I could actually be me and not somebody's employee or somebody's mum or whatever. I was there and I was working towards my goal, and I loved losing myself in other people's worlds and experiences as well. For me, when the writing is going really well and I'm really enjoying it, it's like reading a good book. It's got the same escapism factor. So yes, I had to make sacrifices. I had to get up early in the morning. I wrote through lunch times, and when the children were in bed, instead of sitting down with a glass of wine and watching TV, I would write. But I loved it. So that you have to love it, otherwise there's no point. But that's what kept me going. It really was me being the best version of me.
And did you obviously, you said you were exposed to stories and real stories every day. Did you deliberately were you influenced by those stories, or did you try and create a divide between real life and the fictional characters?
Definitely with the first 8 books, the women's fiction books, there was very much a divide, apart from one story that was based on a true story, and I had full permission from the people involved. It was a real life story. That as soon as they had told me their story, I thought that has to be a book. It's too good. It was a couple that were separated for 50 years. And then reunited. So their story was just the most beautiful love story. How they spoke about each other and how they were together was so inspiring. But apart from that, it was very, very distinct line. Moving into thrillers, I think I've drawn on more of the experience that I've had. Certainly highlighted issues that came up time and time and time again. They don't have anybody's direct experience in them that I spoke to as a journalist. That's a line that I wouldn't cross ever. But certainly if there's an issue that has come up, then I think that must feed in. Things that you hear feed into how you portray that in books. So things like coercive control and child sexual abuse and things like that. I mean, I covered a lot of courts. I heard a lot of details that would never go in a book, never even go in the court reports. They were too distressing, but they feed in your desire for, I suppose, for a wee bit of justice and a wee bit of speaking up on behalf of people who have been affected by these issues. So if I can do that a wee bit in fiction, and that's what I try and do.
So when you, I mean, clearly when you're writing it, when you were writing as a journalist, there are different kinds of rules about, if you're writing a 250 word piece about a case or a 500 word piece or whatever it might be. So when you came to write something that was, I don't know, 80,000 words long,
Mm.
did you structure it all in advance? Did you have a big chart and color coded, or did you just start writing?
I just started writing, I think,
Mm.
very naively, because when I wrote my first novel, I think I just always wanted to write a book. And
Okay.
the timing of when I wrote my first novel, I was turning 30, and also a dear friend of mine who had been my deputy editor in the Dairy Journal had very recently passed away. And she was a young woman. She was only 46, 47, I think, and she left 4 young daughters. She'd been
My
ill for
goodness.
about a year. And the
Mm.
last time I had seen her in hospital, and her last words to me were, "You better write something good for me, girl." So we'd always
Wow.
talked, the two of us always talked about me writing a book.
Mm.
So when Siobhan, her name is Siobhan McElhaney, when Siobhan passed away, I took that just as a challenge to start doing it. And I didn't read any how-to books. I didn't go to a creative writing class. I was always a voracious reader, so I sort of knew the genre, but I just sat down and, I suppose, quite naively wrote, and the book just came out of me. The thrillers require a bit more structure, but with women's fiction, I just like to let the stories develop how they would. I'm more disciplined about it now than I was then, but really it was just a
Mm.
case, I want to write, so I'm going to write.
So yeah, you're quite unusual in as much as unless I'm wrong, the first novel you wrote was your debut novel that got published.
And I was incredibly lucky. And, because we know that obviously talent comes into it, determination comes into it, but a big factor is luck. It's the right book hitting the right desk at the right time. And I was just very lucky that it was a book that resonated with the editor at Pullbeg Press at the time, who was a new mum herself. And the book is about a new
Yeah.
mum, postnatal depression and stuff. So I think it resonated, that sort of sense of identity that comes with becoming a mum. So I was really lucky. It went very, very quickly from me starting to write a book to a year and a half later, even that in the time scale, that book was in the Irish Times bestsellers list,
Wow. Wow.
which was, phenomenal. It was just a steam train, and it went, and it was a dream come true. And I think only now, longer into the whole experience of being an author, do I realize that how unusual that is. Again, I
Mm.
was so naive at the time that I was just, I'll write a book, I'll send it off, we'll see what happens. I was very, very relaxed about it. So I definitely was very naive. I might have thought differently or been a bit more shy about it had I known the reality of the industry. But yeah, it just went on from there. And then my determination to keep doing it kicked in. And 15 books later, we're still there.
Yeah, yeah. So I just sort of wondered actually on that front. Then so you write your book, and then it's a bestseller. It's amazing. But how many people read the book from when you typed at the end to when you sent it off? Did your partner or friends, or how did you do it?
I think I don't know if I don't think anybody actually read it in its entirety.
Wow,
Um,
that's so brave,
an
isn't it?
agent had read it.
Yeah.
Submitted it to a few agents, and my agent had read it. Obviously, um, I was very nervous about people reading it. It's one of those. Wouldn't it be great to be a writer if nobody had to read your work? Because that is the
Yeah,
fear.
absolutely.
Uh-huh. And I was very nervous when it came out. So I hadn't actually shared it with people. Might have read little bits and pieces of it, but nobody had read it in its entirety. So that was quite terrifying when it came out, and you knew that all your friends and family are reading it as well as the wider reading group. Now I have a trusted, maybe 4 or 5 people that would read my novels
Okay.
and I find that invaluable now. But again, the naivety back at the start was just write it, send it off, and go for it.
So writing. This sounds like the beginning of an Oscar Wilde quote, but writing one book is obviously a real challenge. But writing, how many? 10 now, is it?
15.
15. My goodness. Okay.
I know.
Do you kind of worry that you're going to write the most beautiful chapter, and then the next day you're going to wake up and go, "Hang on a sec, I think that's in book 4, and I've already written it." Is there a kind of concern that you're going to be plagiarizing yourself?
Absolutely. Because I think we all have certain turns of phrases or things we use, and you
Yes.
have to be really cautious of not overusing them and not reusing storylines. I do have a terrible habit of reusing names, and I get pulled up on it by editors and have to change it. Every book has
Right.
a key until I'm told to change it. But yeah, it's hard to keep sort of things fresh. I think maybe the way I've done it is changing genre after 8 books,
Yeah.
sort of keep things a little bit clean for me. So, and then once I had 4 of the thrillers out, I then published 2 rom-coms. So I think that's what keeps me fresh.
Yeah.
And not repeating myself. But you have to be cautious every time, because there's just, I think I did actually sit and count up the total word count, and obviously it's over 1 million words at this stage. The chance of you repeating yourself a little bit is there. So you have to approach things very,
Yeah.
very.
I mean, there's a kind of contradiction, isn't there? Because I think you've said that so brilliantly, but there's also that thing that the reason that people are happy to follow you from women's fiction to psychological thrillers to rom-com and back is because of your voice. Now that's something that as a writer you can't, it's something that's in the ether, isn't it? You're not really sure what your voice is, but it's that whatever you're telling, it's an interest in people, probably, isn't it? It's a kind of getting under the skin.
I'm fascinated by people, as I said, about how people portray themselves. I'm fascinated by family relationships, and my books tend to be, yes, obviously plot is a big factor, but it's my characters that I have to know my characters inside and out before I start writing. I need to know everything about them, and they are, and every author says this probably, but they are real people to me. It's definitely for the time I'm writing the book, and there are a few of them that are still existing somewhere out there in the world, and in my head I occasionally find myself wondering how they're getting on. You would think, oh, she would love that, and then you realize that's somebody that you made up, and it's a bit strange. But I am just I suppose going back to saying, being ordinary people with extraordinary stories, I'm continually inspired by what people can come through and how they can come through it. And I'm also fascinated by the thought that every single one of us, this comes down to the thriller side of it, every single one of us, I think, is capable of terrible things in the right or wrong circumstances.
Yeah.
So, good people do bad things, not necessarily for bad reasons, sometimes for the best of reasons without realizing exactly what they're doing. And I find that fascinating. An editor once said to me, there's no such thing as a bad person who is 100% bad, and there's no such thing as a good person who's 100% good. Everybody is like a shade. And that seems pretty obvious when she said it out loud, but for me it was like, oh, right, I don't always have to have, the Scooby-Doo baddie and Scooby and Shaggy in the
And
books.
the kids.
Everybody mixed together, and I'm very, very intrigued by that, and I do like writing flawed characters that do annoy people at times, but ultimately you see their humanity. Everybody shows their humanity.
Yeah, I mean, there's a comment here from Anne Wood saying your characters are so three-dimensional and real that I get so invested when I'm reading your books. Well, that's, I think that's the payoff of you being invested in your characters when you're writing them, because you can't fake it, can you?
You absolutely can't. And I know when I'm writing, sometimes if it's not working, if it's coming across as a bit, you find yourself using cliches, or if I find myself struggling to sit down at my computer to write the rest of the book, then I know I haven't done something right with that character. And sometimes I'm going back and deleting 20,000 words and starting all over again. Because you've mentioned voice. Voice isn't something that you can learn. I don't think it's something that's intrinsically inside of you. And if you don't get that character's voice right, the whole book doesn't matter how good the plot is. It doesn't matter how good the pacing. If the character's not authentic, it doesn't work. It doesn't work for me as a reader anyway, and it doesn't work for me as a writer.
I think we've had an amazing sort of series of interviews, and we've done, you know, maybe we've interviewed like 25 different writers over the during lockdown and slightly before. And some writers talk about how, like Sophie Hannah was talking about writing Poirot books, for instance, and then her own standalone thrillers. And she says the first thing that she writes is the blurb that appears on the back of the book.
Yeah.
And she almost kind of frames that, and it's above her desk. And she says, as far as characters are concerned, they go where I tell them to. You know, I need a character to walk across there with a letter and do it. They just do it. So she's very, very much plot led. Whereas someone like, I think, Joanne Harris that we talked to, it was all about the characters. And Carmel Harrington, I know, was one of the first interviews. She said that, you know, she almost has a formal questionnaire that she asks all of her characters.
Yeah.
So she knows, put them in any situation, she knows what they're going to order, how they're going to respond to loud noise, whatever. So when you've created your characters, so at the end of the book, you shut the book and you move on. Are you not tempted to kind of bring them back?
Some of them I am, and some of them I have brought back. I like to, with my thrillers, I like to have characters in little wee cameo roles from previous books.
Yeah, that's lovely. It's the whole world, isn't it?
So yeah, they all exist in the same world. So for readers, they can pick them up. But I tend to think once you've told a story, and it's a big story, you have to let that character rest. You know, the likelihood in real life that somebody's going to have another big story, quite unlikely. But yeah, as I said, they still exist in my head somewhere, and that's why I like being able to tap into them sometimes in the other books. I can just let people know she's doing okay, actually. She's grand. She's married now. It's lovely. And that's just a little, you know, like Easter egg for the reader. But I'm definitely more of a Carmel kind of a writer, in that I have to know them inside and out. But saying I love it when my characters surprise me. I love it when I'm just writing something and they go and they do something completely unexpected, because in that moment, you know that is how this character would react. And for me, that's the best part of writing. That's when it sort of takes over and I don't even feel like I'm doing it. There's something else, you know, channeling through me. And that's
the word.
I'm always open to that. And I'm always open to changing the ending of a book. I very rarely know who the killer is 100% going to be, maybe until like the last 20,000 words, because it could always change. And I, you know, have an idea, but it's changed on a number of occasions when I just think I could twist it a wee bit more, or maybe that person wouldn't do it, or as they'd evolve as characters. So that's the most fun part of writing for me, when I see the characters flesh out completely into their own, you know, when they're thinking for themselves nearly.
This is fascinating. A couple of things I wanted to circle back on. Firstly, because a lot of people are writers watching this, but a lot of people like me are not. So just tell me, when you're sitting there and a character does something you don't expect them to, what's actually happening at that moment? How does it manifest itself?
You know, it can be a case of I'm getting to a point, I'm waiting for a character to do something, and I just get this big feeling of, oh, they're going to do something else. Let's just try and see if that works. And it really, I know this sounds like craziness, and it sounds a bit like you've notions in yourself, but it really feels like there's just another voice talking through you, and you're simply the person doing the typing. So that character becomes so formed, and to me that's my best writing as well, because that's where it feels most authentic. So it's the best high. Those are the days when I could sit and write 4,000 or 5,000 words and not even realize that I've done it. Whereas, you know, other days it's 500 words and it's pulling teeth. So it's that real high, and you know when you write something, if that is how it's actually meant to be. You just get that feeling. It's hard to quantify it, but you just get that that's exactly right, and it's the biggest high there is.
Wow. So do you Because this is I'm loving how much you're allowing us to get under the hood of how you write. But just tell me about this, the notion of, you talked a lot earlier about how everybody has the ability to do something terrible inside them.
Mm-hmm.
And I suppose it's about how near it is to the surface, isn't it? But when your characters go off and do really, really bad things, are you having to, I suppose you're putting yourself absolutely in their minds, are you? You're thinking about killing someone yourself?
You have to think, what would motivate somebody to do that?
Yeah.
Is it genuine anger? Is it grief? Is it frustration, or is there some trauma in their past? And you really have to get into their heads and really think about what could motivate somebody. Is it fear? Does fear make somebody act in a really terrible way? And I do think it exists quite close to the surface for a lot of people. I mean, all you need to do is say, if somebody said to you, like, your child is in danger and you have to stab somebody to get them into, you would do it. You would do whatever you had to do to protect your child. So I think it's all there, and we are all made up of 100 puzzle pieces of different life experiences and things that we've seen and things that we've heard and things that we've experienced.
Yeah.
And everybody reacts to trauma differently. And I think it's really interesting to look at that as well. Some people react to trauma by going off the rails. Some people use it to drive themselves forward, and that's intrinsic in your personality, and I suppose your support work too. So I think it is fascinating. I think there are a lot of really good people out there who thought they were doing the right thing too, at different times, and really they were doing harm. So it's so multi-layered and complicated. Very rarely you get somebody that's just bad to the bone.
Yeah, but it's funny, when there's somebody like a kind of Yorkshire Ripper or something, you think there's deep trauma going back to a very early age, isn't there, with a lot of these people who become serial killers. But it's interesting. I mean, I studied a lot of sort of post-war British fiction, and clearly anyone writing a novel in the 1950s was having to deal with characters who'd been through the trauma of war and was suffering. It wasn't called post-traumatic stress disorder then. It was called shell shock. It was called all sorts of things. You were working in, you sat through a lot of the Savile inquiry, looking at what happened on a particular day. What year was it? Remind me, what year was
1970? I'm going to show myself up. I think 1971, but I could be wrong, because I always get it a year out. But the inquiry ran for about 6 years.
6 years.
It was very, very full on, days of witness after witness after witness, and obviously some very disturbing evidence and very graphic evidence and stuff. So you hear a lot of that. And there were other aspects of working in Northern Ireland as a journalist at that time, when peace was very, very fragile. My first day on the job in the Derry Journal was 2 days before the first anniversary of the Oma bombing.
Right.
So I arrived in work that day, and my deputy editor said, "You're going to the Donegal town of Buncrana, and I want you to interview one of the mothers who lost her 10-year-old child in the bombing." So that was my first experience as a staff reporter, is sitting across this room from this woman whose life was just destroyed. Her son was on a day trip to country park, and he didn't come home. And there were lots of moments like that once you're out of journalism, you sort of think, God, I've heard a lot, and I've held a lot of hands, and and my trauma is nothing compared to people who've gone through it. But you've been there, you've been at the scene of bomb scares, you've been at the scene of murders, you have interviewed people who maybe have died in horrible circumstances shortly afterwards. You're constantly aware. We were constantly aware always of how fragile things were, and how how much pain surrounds it. Like there's obviously still so much pain around Bloody Sunday. And that's our society as a whole. So that feeds into my books as well. You talk about, like post-war and
Yes.
writing through. There is the post-Troubles hangover here. There are a lot of people that, experience mental health difficulties, a lot of generational trauma.
Yeah.
People may not have lived through it directly, but their parents did and witnessed things or experienced things and carries on. So although my books don't reference the Troubles, and they're very much, a thrillers that tell the story of a particular crime, they are set in that, I suppose, that social background where we're all too aware how difficult things can be quite quickly, and people are emotionally scarred.
But when you're sitting across from somebody who lost their child and they're thinking, they would have been 16 that year, or that their entire life is going to be marked by anniversaries which aren't going to happen.
Exactly. Devastating.
But you're obviously very, very skilled at doing that. It's about empathy, isn't it? And you can't fake that. You're either interested in people, and if you are, that gives them some succor, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And, a lot of people would have said, you're a journalist, you have to stay impartial. And my reply was always, how can you be impartial when you're sitting beside a mother whose child has died and they're crying and their child should never have died? It was horrific. There's no way. And if you can stay impartial to that, you shouldn't really be doing the job. I cried with more parents than not, with more people than not, because you feel their pain, you feel an nth of their pain, and to tell their story properly, you have to allow yourself to feel that, because that's how you honor these people, by letting the emotion and the loss out, rather than just. For example, that young boy in Oma, I didn't want him to just be a victim of the Oma bomb. He was a wee boy that loved going on school trips and loved playing down on the beach, and was always pestering his mummy about this, that, and that's what people need to know about people, their full character. So I suppose again that feeds on the writing character. Right? People are fully rounded. Nobody is just experience.
Is it? I mean, how can writing in a situation like Northern Ireland, clearly there at that point, it's very difficult to be impartial. Did the newspaper have a particular point of view, or was their role to be a paper of record?
Well, we were a paper of record, and we were known as such. The paper's still there, it still is, but it was a dairy journal, so we did take a nationalist slant. One thing, I don't think there's a single paper. Well, there's the one paper in Northern Ireland that claims to, not have one side or the other. Everything here is unfortunately still very much divided.
Yes.
But stories like that were about humanity. They weren't about one side or the other. And I could have gone to the home of somebody from the unionist community who had lost someone, and I would have told the same story in the same way. But there's sensitivities here, and they still exist, and I imagine they'll exist for quite some time, that you had to be aware of. Even now, writing novels, when I mention, my books aren't about the Troubles, the odd little mention, because you can't ignore a history of a place.
No.
You have to be very sensitive to it, because it still is a very painful issue, and it's still ongoing, and we still feel, I think, in a lot of ways, as if we're on a knife edge and it could go either way.
So we talked about impartiality. Do you think as an author you have to be impartial with your own the world you're creating?
I think you do, because you have to give even the bad people the benefit of the doubt.
You do.
Until you find out more about them. So you have to approach every character with a bit of innocent until proven guilty. You have to be able to tell their story as if you don't know the outcome of it. But saying that, I do like to throw an awful lot of emotion and feeling and whatever. But again, that comes back to universality of experience, which is, you know, we're all human, we all hurt, we're all affected by tragedy. So you bring it back to that. And those are things that everybody recognizes. Everybody has experienced loss, everybody has experienced grief. Hopefully not everybody has experienced being the victim of crime, but you can put yourself in that position. And, you know, we all ask ourselves that question every day. God, what if that was me? God, what if my child? What was that? What if that was my mum? You know, and we pray to God we'll never be in that position. And I like to sort of pull people in to look at it for a while, knowing that they're in a safe environment, that they'll come back out of it again.
So, I mean, clearly you talked about, you can't ignore the history of your characters. We have the book cover, USA Today bestseller. There we go. Congratulations. Is it possible, are you going to have to address COVID in 2020, or are all your novels going to be set in 2019 and that's a contemporary novel? How do we do that?
It's very difficult because what readers seem to be saying they don't want any reference to COVID. It's too raw and it's too new, but you can't ignore it, obviously. No. The book that I'm writing at the minute is set in 2022, I think. Okay. So I'm sort of hoping that, you know, a few references to the pandemic that was, a few references to face masks, and that will cover it. I may go back and change the date and move the book back a bit because I think you have to do it authentically, but people don't want to be beaten around the head with, you know, face masks and hand sanitizers. It's going to make life very difficult for authors, I think. You know, romance authors in particular are going to have a tough time, you know. And I don't think that you can murder somebody via Zoom. So it's definitely
there's a challenge as a writer, isn't there? That's a really interesting one. Could you do that? Very, what a fun idea. Because I was thinking that you were talking earlier on about you don't know where the book's going to go sometimes. Do you ever start knowing what the ending is, but not sure how you're going to get there?
Yeah, I do that. And I can quite often get to, 50,000 words of the book and know what the ending's going to be and no idea how I'm going to join all the dots. And that's both the most frustrating part of it and the most exciting part as well. Conversely, I suppose just depend what mood I'm in that day. Some days I can see it's a real challenge and some days I want to throw a laptop across the room, but you're creating a whole new world. It has to challenge. I think if it didn't challenge me, I wouldn't be doing it.
Yeah, because I know we talk about Agatha Christie's and then there were none a few times on this show, and she started with this notion: there's an island, there are 10 dead people, there's no way on and off the island, the police arrive, and then she spent months working out how that could have happened. And it's almost like kind of, I don't know, there must be an analogy about it's like trying to do a jigsaw puzzle without the box or without the pieces. I don't really know.
Exactly, but a brilliant concept. There's a brilliant hooky concept. If you could come up with that and work back from it, you'd be grand. I don't think I could do that really. Oh gosh, I don't know. No, because I do always like to leave it open to the fact that the ending can change. Once the characters really get into themselves. And I think too, writing thrillers, there's such pressure on thriller writers in particular to come up with the big twist.
Right. Yes, I was going to ask you about that. Yeah.
And that's something that's quite controversial. Do you plug a book by saying the twistiest book ever? Some people like that, some people don't. But my original ending can be so ingrained in my head that by the time I'm getting towards writing the end of the book, I'm going, that's so obvious. It's because it's so obvious to me at that stage. So I have to twist it a little bit more. So I do like being surprised by it. And I always just think maybe a better idea will come to the fore when you're 5 months into writing a book than, when you started, you thought it was the best idea ever, but 5 months in, an even better one comes along. So
yeah, I think
permission to go.
TV does that a lot, doesn't it? The twist, even if it's in a Poirot, there's the moment in the big scene when everyone's gathered together where you'll think, oh, it's definitely Claire, and then suddenly it's Simon, and you think, and that probably puts pressure on authors to do the same, does it?
Absolutely, it does, and everybody wants that, and you will see. It's a strange dynamic, because you'll see a lot of people going, I hate when books talk about a big twist. And then you'll see people, the same people saying, oh, I read that book and it didn't really have a great twist at the end. And
Right.
you're like, oh, which do you want? People don't seem to know. But I think more and more it is expected. And I think part of that is the genre is so popular. The standard is so high. The standard is unreal. Even in the island of Ireland, the standard is unreal, and then move it wider than that. You know, you to stand out, you have to do something that is sort of next level. So I think we're always vying for the real big twist, hoping one day we'll get it, the real big concept, just to try and get your voice heard above the noise.
So now obviously your books are being read all over the world and are, you know, as we can see, best-selling books in other countries, where people are obviously reading them from different backgrounds to the background someone reading it in Derry or even London. Do you try and think about your reader when you're writing, or are you just thinking about your characters and the plot?
Do you know, I tend to focus more on the characters and the plot. I think if you try to think about your readers all the time, and you're never going to please everybody.
No.
So I think you could tie yourself up into huge knots doing that. You know, at the same time, there's certain rules that you take on board. So, you know, your readers won't like it if you killed the pet dog. So you never do that. You keep your readers. Never kill the dog. You know, there's certain rules that, you know, it's not going to go down well. But no, I tend to just go with my characters and see where it happens to lie. And you know, you never know how a book is going to hit and how people are going to react to it. And genuinely, every time a book of mine comes out, I am on tenterhooks going, are people going to like these characters? Are they going to hate them? Are they going to buy the story, or are they going to think it's ridiculous? I never have a confidence when a book is coming out to go, this is great, read it. I find that very, very difficult to do. Probably the toughest thing, self-promotion is the toughest aspect of it.
But it's an increasingly, particularly in the last year, it's a very important part of being a writer, isn't it?
Huge part. I mean, even when I compare it to when I started, you know, when I started, the first book was published in 2007. There was no Facebook or Twitter or any of that, and authors were still very sort of distant figures. So, and you know, I might have sent an email to Marion Keyes's webpage and hoped that she might, you know, get a fan note. Now I can go on and chat with her on Twitter.
Yes.
And people expect and want their authors to engage with them and chat back to them. And you know what? It's only sort of fair that you do, but you also have to write books, and you could spend your entire life doing self-promotion, and it's getting that balance right between being somebody that people want to talk with and somebody that promotes their work but doesn't over promote their work, because I'm more than just, you know, an author, and I have other opinions, and it's sort of finding your voice there as well on social media can be a bit tricky.
Does the teen read your books?
He doesn't. No, I think he's a bit scared to, in case, you know, mommy has written a
sex scene
adult or something. Yeah, exactly. I think he's absolutely horrified. My daughter's actually probably more likely to read them before he does, because she loves thrillers.
Okay.
Even though she's only 11, she's a big fan of Kelly Taylor's
right.
books and stuff. So, you know, she will gobble them up a little bit, but hopefully one day they'll read them. I have managed to get, my father's not a reader at all, really, and I have managed to get him to read the thrillers, which I'm taking as my big achievement in life, and get my dad to read.
So audiobooks have become a huge thing. And if you go back to when you started, they were kind of, there were these unabridged audiobooks, which were kind of cassettes, and there were these big sort of styrofoam packets with all these things coming out. And obviously, people don't necessarily have to read your stories now to experience them. But have you listened to many of your audiobooks? Is it something that?
Of my own,
Yeah,
I've listened. Yeah, I've listened to so I get an idea of all the narrators and how they're bringing
yeah,
the characters to life. I have been blessed with absolutely amazing narrators, and I think it's one thing that Avon and HarperCollins do really well.
they do. They do.
I I was blown away the first when my second book with them, Apple of My Eye, came out, and there are two voices in that, and they had two, they two different narrators, and I was like, oh my goodness, two different narrators. This is brilliant. Everybody had a really unique sound, obviously, then when the book came out. And when Liar's Daughter, which was last year's release, came out, we had five different narrators.
Wow. Wow.
And there were some, incredible people that they got involved in that. People that are really well known in the TV and theatre scene and stuff in Ireland. And with Ask No Questions, we have one of the cast of Derry Girls doing narration. So I think audiobooks, I'm a huge audiobook fan.
Yeah.
But they have to get the narrator right. You get the narrator, it's like watching TV or watching a movie or whatever else, except you can take it with you wherever you go, and you can ingest the book in lots of different ways. But I go through maybe 2 audiobooks a week.
Wow.
And that's when I'm doing school runs or walking the dog, things like that. So it allows me to experience a lot more books than maybe I would have been able to before.
So do you read your work out loud, at the end of the day or the beginning of the next day, trying dialogue and that kind of thing?
I try it. I find it really difficult to do. But if something is definitely feeling a bit sticky for me, I will. Dialogue, I think, is important to read out.
Yeah.
Think about how people actually talk, but then I suppose you can't really write the way people actually talk, because I'm putting in all sorts of pauses. You would never write that in. But it's important to read that out and to see if it sounds genuine and authentic. But I don't know, I get really, I suppose even though there's nobody else listening, it's just me, I feel a wee bit embarrassed reading my own stuff out. It's one of those sort of silly things. But when it's the only way, I suppose, that you really know that it's working and it's smooth and it's rhythm. And I do love to write stuff that sort of moves along at a nice pace and has a lovely rhythm to it. It is more and more, I think, it used to always be story, story, story. Now I like the process of writing. Although I didn't know at the very start, when I was very naive and started writing, I'm obsessed with knowing now structure and character and just actually getting a sentence that when I read it back, I go, oh, that was a good sentence. That feels like an achievement. It feels really, really good. So that's where I'm at the moment.
Keeping your energy going as a writer is really important, because it's an incredibly lonely business. But do you, I think we were talking to, I think it was Joanne Harris, and she said 350 words. That's what she aims to write every day, which she kind of knows that she can do that. She gets to 351. It's a really, really successful day. Now, you've said on some days you can write 2,000 words. Is that right?
Yeah. I tend to, it's just, I can almost nearly set my watch by every book. The first 10,000 words I can write really quickly, 1,000, 2,000 words a day. I can have first 10,000 words done in a week. And invariably every time I go, I've written 10,000 words in a week. I'm going to have this book finished in no time. That doesn't happen.
Okay.
To slow down somewhat. When I get to sort of the murky middle that you hear a lot of writers talk, if I get 500 words done in a day, that is winning. I like to aim for 1,000.
Yeah.
But I also know that once I get about 60,000 words in a manuscript, I'll be writing 2,000 or 3,000 words a day, not out of any great sense of, work ethic. I just get so caught up in the story. that it runs on with itself, and I don't want to stop writing. It's just like, leave me alone in this quiet space and just let me write. Don't talk to me. I'm enjoying myself. So it's almost every book is just about the same. So when I am struggling, I'm at around 50,000 words from my current manuscript at the minute, and I'm going, just hang on in there. You're almost at 60,000 words. Once you get there, you know it's going to sort of write itself from that point on. So I'm almost there. But if I got 500 words done a day at the moment, I would be delighted. Maybe even delighted with less than that, given homeschooling and COVID and Brexit and everything else that's annoying our heads at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the murky middle is something you talked about, abandoning 20,000 words. Is that something, was that when you were in the murky middle and you just thought you've kind of gone 3 degrees in the wrong direction and you need to cut back?
Yeah, I think there was one book in particular when I was writing it, that I got, I think I written one draft up to 15,000 words and scrapped it. Then I got to 20,000 words and scrapped it. Whatever it was, the voice wasn't right. And I would spend an awful lot of time trying to correct the voice or try to make it fit, or try to make it fit the story. That I actually went, do you know what? I'd be quicker and this would be more enjoyable if I just scrapped it and started. It was still the same character, it's still the same story, but it clicked to me. There she is. It's like all of a sudden, you know, you've been waiting and you sort of hear whispers of who this person's going to be, and then it comes to you and the clarity is there and you know the voice. And you definitely know when you start writing what works and what doesn't, what's really going to work.
Yeah.
If you're really dreading sitting down and it's being dragged out of you and you're just like, oh God, it's this character's chapter again, I can't be bothered, then you know something's terribly wrong. And you know, they should feel like real people that you want to give a hug to. And some characters, one of the things I love most is that I think in about 3 of my books there have been characters that have only ever meant to be in one chapter, and they've ended up as an equal voice and a POV, and because they've just insisted that they had to be written. They're like badgering me in my ear all the time, going, no, I'm going to say this, I'm going to say this. And that's the best bit. And, you know, again, I know that sounds a bit crazy, but
not at all.
I do find that some characters demand to be written and some characters demand to be scrapped at 20,000 words.
So tell me, do you write the novels sequentially? I mean, when you're writing a novel, do you start at the beginning and write through to the end?
I do. Except for the one I'm working on at the moment, which is the first one that I have done in sort of bits and pieces and then slotted together. And I'm hoping that it works. I think it works. I think for about the first 30,000 words, I didn't know if it was working or not, but I think I finally got it to slot together exactly the way I want. And that comes with wanting to challenge myself to do something a little bit different. But yeah, I really am a sort of beginning, middle and end kind of a person. I like to see progress, and I like to have an idea of where I'm going. I like to stop every 10,000 words and read the manuscript up to that point and know that it's flowing. And part of that is, you know, my deadlines have been quite tight too. So on the one go, I know that I'm going in the right direction.
I find that really interesting because, you know, there are some weeks when I'm just like fundamentally in quite a bad mood. I don't know why. It's just, you know, the weather or
the air, something in the air. Yeah.
But so you can't control one's moods, but you then have to go in and write the novel sequentially. So is that not challenging? You've got a sort of really romantic, important kind of throbbing scene in the middle and you're just really grumpy. Is that a real challenge?
It is a challenge. And sometimes I find that if you have to do something that's like really pleasant like that, it lifts your mood and takes you out. Great escapism, which is brilliant. I think the temptation with me, and I know me and my personality, is if I wrote out of order and I wrote the scenes that I was really, really excited about first, then I'd be really fed up by the end of the book going, oh, I have to write all the bits in between now. You know, I like to go, hang on in there. You know that this big moment is coming and this big meeting or scene is going to happen. And that's what drives me through the sort of tougher bits. It's also there's writer Brian McGilloway, who is from Derry as well. And he once said to me, you know, see this notion of writer's block. He says, you know, you never hear about teacher's block or doctor's block or shop worker's block. He says, can you imagine if, you know, went into work and went, oh, I just can't today, I've got teacher's block.
That's so interesting. Yeah.
So and when he said that, I went, yeah, okay. So I think you can always just push yourself, even if it is 350 words, through it. You know, it's quite strange to say, no, I just can't create today. You mightn't be able to create your perfect story, but you can do something.
I love that notion that you go to the bus stop and the writer's like, the bus driver's going, just not feeling like driving a bus today.
Exactly.
You're going to have to walk or stay at home. We've got a few minutes left, and there are some great questions here. Louisa Heaton's asking about, do you find it easier writing women's fiction or psychological fiction? I'm guessing there's, you know.
Yeah. Do you know what? Women's fiction probably comes more naturally to me.
Okay.
More of a natural voice, but I enjoy writing psychological thrillers more. I just enjoy the process of it, and enjoying learning more about it and how different each story can be. Women's fiction tends to run along a similar sort of pattern, especially rom-coms tend to run along a similar pattern. You sort of know what you're going to get into when you start writing. It's very natural for me to slip into that voice, but the challenge and the passion and the real joy comes from getting the thriller right. So it's a little bit of column A and a little bit of column B.
Okay, there's a lot of pressure on writers and on publishers and on booksellers about trying to sell a thriller with a kind of hook, you know, high concept. Is that something that you worry about?
Definitely is, because, as I said before, the standard is so high and the competition is so fierce, and there's some amazing hooks. And yeah, there are times I hear somebody else's, you know, synopsis or their premise, and I go, God, that's brilliant. I really wish I'd come up with that. It's hard. It's hard to sort of have faith in the story, and I don't know if there are any original stories. That's that whole thing, you know, there's no original stories. There's original ways to tell them. So you do feel that pressure to come up with something completely different. For me, that has to be in the writing of it, maybe more than the hook. It's a difficult one, especially 15 books in. It's quite tricky, but you never know where inspiration's going to come from. And, you know, I could be sitting here going, I have no idea what the next one's going to be, and I need to find a really good hook for this story, and then I could see something 5 minutes from now and it could all slot into place. But there definitely is a pressure. I don't feel it so much coming from my publishers, funnily enough. I put that pressure on myself. Because every book should be better than the one before and should be more challenging than the one before. So I'm constantly pushing myself to come up with that big idea that's really going to make an impact.
So when we have you back in 2036, you will have been the author of 30 books by that point, will you? I mean, you're kind of writing one a year?
Well, I'm now writing one a year. Last year, I actually published 4 books, which is insane. Wow. I don't recommend it.
No.
In pandemic, especially. It was tough work, but hopefully I'll be around, you know, 30 books and other projects and stuff. I would just be delighted. I'd be delighted. All I want is to be able to do this as my career. I'm very, very privileged that I am able to write full time, and, you know, financially I'm able to write full time. I know that that's not the norm for a lot of writers, and I just would like to keep telling stories for as long as people will let me.
Well, that seems a fantastic note on which to round off. I can't believe this has been an hour. I have to say, this has been, everybody's blown away by how open, honest, and your generosity with the answers. And Everybody here who hasn't read you, I hope, is already now ringing their local bookstore, stocking up on Claire Allan.
Well, I know you've just had it up on screen.
Yeah, there we go.
Wave it in front.
There we go. And this is out right now.
It's out right now. It's out in print editions are out in Ireland, and it's out in ebook and audio across the UK as well. So you should be able to get your hand on it. So
download it onto your Kindle, buy a hard copy, whatever. So thank you very, very much indeed. And you're going to be writing this afternoon, I suppose, is the final question.
I will be, because I just am pushing towards that 60,000 words so I can really enjoy the end of the book. So I took a day off yesterday because of publication. So I need to crack the whip and get back into it today.
Brilliant. And I should say, Sam Blake, her book is out right now, and there's 99p on Kindle, so that's an astonishingly good deal. So I want everyone to go and buy Claire, download Sam, and have a great weekend. See you all next Friday. And again, Claire, thank you. I've really enjoyed this hour. Thank you so much. See you very soon. And I think we come to an end now. Maybe we do. Let's see what happens. We'll just keep talking, and then, time is